creative process, as I understand it, is that thousands of people all contribute their ideas and their emotions and their blood and their sweat and tears just for the sheer kind of kinetic thrill of the filmmaking.
I always thought that Terminator 1 it's a wonderful life with guns.
Meeting Jim, seeing his artwork, seeing the endoskeleton, reading the script, slam dunk, not a question, this was going to be a memorable movie.
This is going to be a great movie if it's this script. We got to get this movie.
Everyone else around me said, maybe you should not play a villain. That is not good for your career.
I think the love story is what really made it work for the audiences.
We did everything you can imagine in terms of guerrilla filmmaking to pull the movie off.
Nights, rats, alleys, fast-moving cars.
So I set off the rest of the charges. We put it out, and there was a collective groan amongst everybody on the set.
I felt a sense of fear as to, can I do this? Can I cut a picture that's this complex?
It's the feeling of Terminator. Gotta keep going, he's after us. The schedule is after us, the deadline is after us.
Jim and I met in the early 73, I think, and there weren't that many people in the town who were interested in, science fiction and all that kind of stuff. And there was a third friend of ours, and we're all still friends, a guy named Randy Frakes, and Randy's worked with Jim as well over the years. And, I learned a lot about writing from Randy. I think Jim did too. And we met in this tiny little town, and we all wanted to be, in the show business. We all wanted to make movies. And he had met Gail Hurd on one of the Corman pictures. She was sort of a budding young producer at the time.
It started when I first met Jim, when he was working as a model builder on Battle Beyond the Stars, and I was the assistant production manager.
We were all doing work. I was doing post-production work in Venice, on Main Street, and I know there was a model shop in the same building.
I remembered meeting him actually when I was overseeing a pickup shoot for Humanoids from the Deep that took place in 1920 Main Street, where he was building models. I, of course, assumed he was the head of the model shop. It turned out he was just a model builder, but he acted like he was the head of the model shop. He had that kind of authority.
I recall once Jim walking into my editing room while I was editing some scene of humanoids, Rob Bottin in a humanoid suit attacking somebody, and I sensed somebody behind me, and it was Jim kind of looking over my shoulder.
We ran into trouble in the making Battle Beyond the Stars. We needed someone to step in as art director, and overnight Jim went from model builder to art director.
So as things progressed, it just seemed quite natural, we knew each other, that we would help each other write things and work on projects and that sort of thing.
We worked really closely together and decided that in the future we wanted to collaborate. He'd direct and I would produce.
It's really funny. Jim has said over the years that he always loved nightmares because they gave him great imagery, and like pleasant, happy dreams were just sort of a waste of time,
When he was in post-production in Rome on Piranha 2, he called me one morning and said, in a fever dream, he had this visions image.
He said that he'd had this dream about the Terminator coming out of the fire.
A robot, but one that previous to that was a cyborg, but was covered in human flesh, emerging from the flames.
And he came back, and he didn't have a nickel in his pocket, and he ended up, I think, sleeping on Randy's floor. Randy had this sort of cinder block bunker place out in the valley, and Jim stayed there. So he had this dream, and it just, he knew, that there was something great in that, and what he was looking to do was to write something that would be so irresistible that no one would not let him direct it, And that's where the whole thing came from, this one image. I thought, yeah, well, a thing like that doesn't exist today, so it has to come from the future. And I remember very specifically, he wanted to make the hero of the piece a woman.
And from that came the entire story of Terminator. And we decided that we would collaborate on the film and bring it to the screen. We were turned down by every major studio. However, we did have one connection to Orion Pictures, Barbara Boyle and Frances Dole, who had worked for Roger Corman at New World Pictures, were both employed by Mike Medavoy. And we slipped the script to them, and they loved it. Jim Cameron had worked with Lance Henriksen on Piranha 2, and he very much wanted Lance to play the Terminator. He saw the Terminator initially as someone who would really blend in, which Lance can do.
That would have been really interesting, because Lance saw the Terminator as a kind of a praying mantis, and he had kind of worked on these moves and this whole attitude. He put foil in his teeth and went around climbing up fire escapes in Venice and just sort of being this Terminator praying mantis thing, and probably scared a lot of his neighbors.
And I remember Lance actually came in full makeup to meet with John Daly at one point.
Lance showed up early, and so you have to imagine there's this waiting room and this very nice young female secretary, and Lance walks in as the Terminator. She has no clue what any of this is going to be about. So he walks up and he's, but I think he said, "Is Jim Cameron here?" And he just kept sitting there, not moving the entire time, or doing, some bizarre behaviors, spooky stuff. And he had everybody in that office scared to death. They had no clue who this guy was, because Jim was going to show up. Jim had the meeting, and he was just bringing Lance along and saying, look at this. This is a great guy. I worked with him on another movie. So he just kind of showed up. And they weren't expecting him, and they certainly weren't expecting him with metal teeth and in character. And I think they were about 10 seconds away from calling the police when Jim walked through the door and, and said, "Oh, Lance." Everybody kind of calmed down. But he put the fear of God into those people, which is always a good thing to do to executives, don't you think?
Clearly, when we went with someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger, that was very different. And we had Lance in the film, and instead he played a police detective as opposed to the Terminator.
I hate these press cases, especially the weird press cases.
And believe it or not, O.J. Simpson was at one point brought up to star as the Terminator.
Basically, they were looking for someone to play the heroic character in the film, in the first Terminator. And they asked me to play that character. And I asked them to send me the script. That I have a slot open for spring, and I want to see the script first. And I read the script, and I immediately could relate much more to the character of Terminator than the heroic character.
Initially, this was not a Jim idea, and frankly, he wasn't happy about it, because they wanted him to play Reese. He was supposed to have his lunch with Arnold and meet Arnold, and he really didn't think he was right for Reese, and Arnold, in some ways, came with a cachet of power that Jim didn't quite have, so he was a thing to be dealt with. Jim couldn't just say no. So the only way he could get out of it was to pick a fight with him. So I remember, sort of in the house, and Jim says, "Well, wish me luck. I'm going to go meet Arnold. I'm going to have to pick a fight with Arnold, because the only way I could get him out of the movie was to not get along with him, and then, nobody would want to have them all work together." So he said, "I'm going to go pick a fight with Arnold. If it doesn't go well, you can have the chair and the stereo,
And then you and I, we got together at the lunch,
Right.
which I ended up paying for, right? Remember that?
Okay, I think it was worth it in the long run.
Definitely
Well,
was
remember
worth
we were with that guy from Hemdale, and he didn't bring any money.
Exactly.
And I didn't bring any money because I was broke.
And as usual,
And,
had thousands and thousands of dollars in cash in my pocket.
I think you just pulled out a big canvas
Pulled
bag
it
and
all out,
plopped it
yes.
on the table.
That's right. That was it.
And as it turns out, in the interim, Arnold didn't want to play Reese at all. Arnold read the script and said, "Well, I want to play this Terminator guy." And so Jim went from just about ready to pick a fight with him to, "That's a good idea."
Well, what I did was I raced out of there, shot back to Hemdale, and talked to the producer and to John Daly at Hemdale, and I said, "I think Arnold should play the Terminator." And they all looked at me like I was crazy. But John Daly got on the phone and talked to your agent.
Exactly.
And said, and I remember the conversation very clearly. He's like trying to figure out how to play it, and he's kind of, "Well, yes, I know, Lou, but he is the title character after all, and yes, I know he's a villain. Yes, I know it's true. He is the bad guy, but it's the title character after all, Lou."
That's
and
right.
The deal was made that afternoon.